I was sworn into office in January of 1979, and Ruth Ann Carrozza, who was hired on my first congressional staff and did great work on the whole redress issue as well as many other civil rights, civil liberties issues, along with, frankly, the excellent staff that I had in Congress. But Ruth Ann, she received and had the drafts that had been developed primarily, well, had been developed by the Seattle chapter of the JACL. I mean, the redress that became law 10 years later, the major reason for it was the work of the Seattle chapter of the JACL, and that is something that can't be overly emphasized. But anyway, so we had that draft, and Ruth Ann took it and started working on it and got it in a position to be introduced. And I, during that time, in the first beginning months of 1979, was talking to other members of Congress. Bob Matsui from California and I were elected in the same class in the 1978 election. And so talked to Bob about it, and Bob was a little surprised when he heard we were actually going, there's a freshman orientation for like a 3-day orientation before you're even sworn in to office that was at the Kennedy School. And so all the new members of Congress will all go up to that. And so Bob and I was sitting beside Bob Matsui on the plane flying up to Cambridge or Harvard, wherever we were flying to, Boston. And I said to Bob, I said, well, you know, I've got this, this draft legislation that I want to introduce for compensation to American citizens who had had their rights taken away during the internment. And Bob said, "You're what?" I mean, he was of course very informed about this whole issue. You know, for an awful long time he'd been hearing about this issue, and I remember he'd tell this story about how we were sitting on the plane. And I told him I was going to be introducing this, and he was a little taken back by it, and he'd laugh about that. But I of course asked other members of Congress, of course, if they'd like to co-sponsor. And Norm Mineta was also a member of Congress, and Norm was more senior to me by about maybe 4 years or so. He was an excellent member of Congress. And talked to Norm, and Norm was all from the very beginning, always very involved and very much for us doing that. But anyhow, we got maybe 20, 25 sponsors or so, and introduced the legislation. And one of the things I look back and laugh at a lot now was when I introduced the legislation. I remember active members here in the Japanese American community here, probably JACL members. I remember they're asking me when I introduced it, well, how long did I think it would take for this to pass? And I remember saying, oh, 10 years. I had no idea. I had no idea. But I said, oh, 10 years, you know. Well, as it turned out, it took almost exactly 10 years. It was signed into law by President Reagan in 1988. I mean, it was all at the end of the year. It was almost exactly 10 years. I've always laughed at that, but I just said 10 years off the top of my head. I had no idea how long it was going to take. And I probably also didn't have any idea how big the obstacles were to overcome to get there.